So I'm going to go ahead and get started as people are starting to jump on the call or the Zoominar. I don't know what I really calling these now, but I'm so glad that you're here this evening. Your time is extremely valuable. You don't get that back. So the point of this is to bring value for every moment that you spend with me, just going through this topic. We're going to be covering critical theory, critical race theory in the Christian vision this evening. This is a topic that has come up quite a bit in conversation over the last couple of years, and with everything going on in the culture, going on particularly in the United States, it's come to the forefront. And so I thought it was be wise and a good thing to sort of cover this topic, give my perspectives, give a biblical perspective, and just give everyone an opportunity just to learn more. Critical theory, critical race theory is complex, and my goal is not to get caught up in the complexities of it. It's really just to give an overview of how it works and then what's going on with it. So I'm very glad you're here. So let's get started. This passage will be central to what we're talking about this evening. This is from Acts 17, verse 26. And he, God, made from one man every nation of mankind to live on all the face of the earth, having determined and allotted the periods and the boundaries of their dwelling place. So God put each of us here. He knew that even we would be on this Zoominar tonight together. He placed us where we live in a specific time, in a specific cultural context, and that was all God and his providence, and he's sovereign. Every person is put in a time and a place, in a family, in a culture across the world throughout history. And so Acts 17:26 will provide us the basis for where we're heading. So this evening, we're gonna cover several aspects of and answer a couple of questions here. How do new ideas shape reality and culture? What is critical race theory? How is it impacting the church? How should Christians think about critical race theory, or CRT? You'll see that as well. CRT is critical race theory. And then what can I do about it? Individually, what can I do about it? And so, truth be told, I don't know if we're going to get through the whole thing because I don't want to go so fast that we miss certain aspects that people have interest in. So we're going to get through as much as we can this evening. There will be probably a phase 2 of this that we'll cover maybe in a couple of weeks or so. We're going to get as far as we can, and I'm going to move pretty fast, but I'm going to try to dive down, go from 35,000 feet, dive down low in order to get a better look at some of the aspects of critical race theory, and particularly how it's impacting the church. So my background, I went to college in Florida. It was a liberal arts college. And I went in as a freshman. I was a history major for about one semester, and then moved over to sociology. And so the sociology and anthropology department at Rollins, that's where I went to school, Rollins College, are very intertwined. And I was a sociology major, switched majors to anthropology, I believe middle of my sophomore year. And then just finished out in anthropology with a degree in anthropology with a heavy dose of sociology. And my minor was in Australian studies. So I went over to Australia for a semester to the University of Sydney, and it was more anthropology there as well. But coming from such a liberal environment at Rollins, first of all, I don't want to disparage the school or anyone in the departments. I have a great deal of respect for my professors. They were extremely intelligent. They were very kind to me. Looking back, I just don't agree with their worldview. There was a lot of neo-Marxism, cultural Marxism, and just straight up Marxism within those departments. So that's what I came out of. And so some of these books that you see here in the photo, Russia's youth culture, race, class, power in Brazil, Castro the Blacks in Africa, freedom and culture, soul rebels, the Rastafari, gender and discourse, the evolution of desire, that's strategies of human mating. We have from slavery to freedom. So this was the environment I was in, and these were some of my books that I kept most of my books from college, and I'm glad I did. I used to, several years after graduating, I sort of looked back and thought that I'd wasted my time with anthropology. But now, today, seeing what we're seeing in the culture, I've found that God has redeemed it. I've kept my books, and I still remember quite a bit of what I learned. And so that's sort of a bit of a background. So I'm coming at this from having been in a very liberal arts school, in a very liberal anthropology, sociology department. So here we go. Oops. Ideas have consequences and bad ideas have victims. Everybody's heard the phrase, ideas have consequences, but bad ideas have victims. And so we're going to keep that phrase in mind as we go through what we're going to see tonight, because ideas, the things that we think of, the things that go into the culture and make their way through society, have impact. Ideas manifest into realities in the culture and in society, and some of those ideas are bad, and there's victims of those bad ideas. So how do new ideas shape reality and culture? So I'm going to use the example of these three men. Darwin, of course, the father of evolution, survival of the fittest, favored races. We'll get into that in a few minutes. Marxism, materialism, power dynamics in economics. He had a vision of reality through economics. Gramsci, Antonio Gramsci, he was an Italian Marxist, and he sort of coined the phrase cultural Marxism, or created cultural Marxism, and applied power dynamics in culture. So we're going to use these three guys throughout the evening tonight, just to give some examples. This is not going to be exhaustive. It's to answer some questions and pique some interest, and also inform what we're dealing with when we're talking about critical theory. So how do new ideas shape reality and culture? So some of you may have seen this before. This is the diffusion of innovation. Some people call it a law. Some people call it a theory. I just call it the diffusion of innovation. This is how ideas take hold and then work their way through the culture. So one of those ideas would be the iPhone, which was a game changer in the cell phone market. Before, the phones were really just dumb phones. I mean, you could text. There were some like your PDAs and Blackberries that you could do quite a bit on your phone. But then the iPhone came out, this thing right here, and it changed everything. There's no buttons. It's all a touch screen. It's very user friendly. And so the iPhone, when Steve Jobs and Apple came out with the iPhone, it was a great innovation. So on the left hand side of the screen, that's where the innovation happens. And those percentages that you see are population, right? Those represent a whole population of a culture or of a nation or of a state, or it could be a school, or it could be a church. So you have an innovation, the iPhone. Well, the early adapters, or early adopters rather, after the innovation's made, the iPhone comes out, they show it, it's going to be out next week. Well, the early adopters are the ones that wait in line for 3 days outside the Apple store in order to get the iPhone as soon as it comes out. They want the first one, knowing full well they can walk in the next week and buy one off the shelf. This is an example, if you've heard of Simon Sinek, he talks about this diffusion of innovation in the iPhone. So after these early adopters come in and they get their iPhones, then you get the early majority. These are the people that were waiting for the first people to come through the door. These people come in a week or two later and buy their iPhone off the shelf. Then you have the late majority. They're sort of, well, I don't know if the iPhone's a good idea. I like my BlackBerry, or I like my Nokia flip phone, or my Razor. But they finally say, they see their friends, everyone else is getting iPhones, so they jump on board. So here comes this late majority. And now, finally, you have the laggards. Those are the people that are the type of people, Simon Sinek would say, those are the people that love their rotary dial phones but can't have them anymore because all they have is touchstones. So they sort of have to move on to the technologies. They're sort of dragged into the innovation. So that's how the innovation works. So I'm going to use the example of Darwinian evolution. So Charles Darwin has an idea. Evolution. Things weren't created, things came into being, and all life evolved from a single organism. And then there was the tree of life. You guys may have remembered that in school, where you learned about the tree of life, where one little organism split off and became all of these different types of species. And so his treatise was The Origin of Species by Means of Natural Selection or Preservation of Favored Races in the Struggle for Life. So he has this idea, right? He's an innovator. He innovates with this idea. So what's interesting about this diffusion of innovation is that when you hit about 16% on this bell curve, it starts to work for you. So things start to move your direction when you make that innovation. There's a tipping point. The idea catches on, and then here comes the early majority. Now people start moving in the direction of the innovation. They start taking it on, whether it's an idea or a product. The next thing is that you have a critical mass. So now the idea is moved further into the population. More people are accepting it. They want their iPhones, or if it's Wi-Fi, internet, whatever that innovation is. But we're going to go back to Darwin. It's evolution. And so now it's not just the innovators and the early adopters. You're now getting a critical mass in the culture who are now just taking on and believing the idea, human evolution. What you end up having is that the idea, there's like an S curve, and this will all make sense in a minute, is that the idea totally gets immersed into the culture and is adopted by basically everyone. It goes up to 100%, not everyone, right? There are those that don't buy the idea. So the idea is moving towards 100% adoption in the culture. So here's where you have it. 150 years after Darwin, Darwinian evolution has been adopted by the dominant culture. It's not 100%, but find me a school where they're not teaching evolution. Find me a university that doesn't have human evolution as a part of their core curriculum. And evolution, Darwinian evolution, informs the rest of the culture because it's completely accepted and adopted by the dominant culture. It is now dominant culture, Darwinian evolution. So if you look at the bottom of the graph there, I put some words. You'll see the academy, arts and music, the elites and media, politics, then everyone else. So this is sort of the idea of how things move through the culture. Is at the very top of the culture is the academy and usually the arts and music, and then everything moves down through the culture, and politics is downstream from the rest of culture. They're always the late majority, the politicians. So and then you have everybody else. So that's sort of how the law or the theory of diffusion of innovation works with ideas, because ideas shape reality and culture. They're not just stagnant out there in the ether. They change things, and ideas are very powerful. And a perfect example is Darwinian evolution. It was a powerful idea, and it's been adopted by the culture. So culture is to humans as what water is to fish. We don't even know we're in culture. It takes a lot of work, mental work, to actually pull ourselves back a bit to understand what's going on in the culture, because we're immersed in it. It's our assumptions, it's our behaviors, it's what we believe about reality around us and interact with reality, and then what we produce, what we say, what we sing, what products we make, what music we make, what ideas get pushed out there. So it's like fish. They don't know they're wet. They're just in the water. Well, that's like humans in culture. That's what culture is as humans. It's our water. We don't even know we're wet. And so one of our little guys in the picture has an idea. And so here's how it works. He's an innovator. He has this idea. He's going to jump over into the bowl, a brand new bowl with his brand new idea. The rest of the fish are not innovators. They're the maybe early adopters or late majority laggards, all that. Well, to the right, you have the last fish out of the bowl. Well, he's the laggard. So that just gives you an idea of sort of what this looks like. And then just for fun, I decided, here we go. Well, let's bring Darwin back into the picture again. Evolution, there's the idea. He's going to take this idea. He's the first one. He wasn't really necessarily the first one to completely have the evolution idea, but he's going to run with it. And then before you know it, evolution dominates culture. And there you got your little laggard goldfishes jumping over in the bowl with all the little Darwinian folks, the Darwinian fish. So that's sort of how ideas work. I think it's important to set the stage for how ideas get into the culture and shape our reality and then shape the culture. So it's important to know that we have ideas and assumptions about reality around us that came from somewhere. What we must do is apprehend those ideas and test them. And we'll get down to that in a little bit. But right now, we're going to go right into what is critical race theory. Now, going into this, I know people are sensitive about this topic. I know that people are afraid to talk about race and ethnicity and what's going on because they fear that they'll say the wrong thing or do the wrong thing. And this place with us on this webinar is we're going to talk about this. This is a safe place for people to discuss these things, answer their questions, deal with their doubts, and we're going to take this topic on with grace, love, humility, but we're going to be straightforward and honest and take a look at what critical race theory is. So I've set up on my site, or it'll be live tomorrow, there's a show notes page for this webinar where I'll put all of the links and some helpful links and resources for you to explore on your own, because we're not going to be able to dive into everything tonight. So I'll put those there, and then you can just, follow all the rabbit trails. I think you'll find that they're extremely interesting. We're going to put have things from both sides there of this discussion. but I'll put those on the show notes page tomorrow, resources for you all, and there'll be a follow-up email. And by the way, if you do have any questions, use the Q&A, and I'll try to get some questions answered at the end of our time. So critical theory roots, it begins with Marx. Everything that you hear about critical theory begins with Marx and Marxism. So he views the world and reality through economics. There is no metaphysical, only matter, power, and energy exist. That's it. There's no spirit. There's no, ultimately, no real morality or anything like that. It's matter, power, and energy. What he sees as the problem are owners. It's economic, so it's the owners of the business, those who control businesses, those who control industry. And those owners, he labels them as oppressors. Then he puts them in contention with the workers, who are the oppressed. So it's this oppressors versus oppressed group, owners versus workers, the bourgeois versus the proletariat in the language of Marx. So now he's set up this power struggle here. And he sees everyone, you're either an oppressor or you're being oppressed by an oppressor. That's Marx's vision. The action that's required to deal with the problem, according to Marx, is revolution. Workers should overthrow the owners. The oppressors, the oppressed should overthrow, and the oppressed should overthrow the oppressors, right? And so the goal is to create a utopian state where it's equality in outcomes. Basically, it's not equality in opportunities. It's equality. It's a flattening of society, a flattening of culture. In his vision, that would be the ultimate, quote unquote, heaven on earth, was this utopian state where the means of production are owned by the state. And it's basically it's communism, where everything is shared. And so it's flattening. Cultural Marxism, we're going to move to a gentleman by the name of Antonio Gramsci. I mentioned him earlier. He's very important because he's pivotal in understanding critical theory and critical race theory. And so he was, like I said, an Italian Marxist, and he basically posited that the Marxist revolution failed to materialize in the West because the dominant cultural power had hindered it. Basically, he called it the hegemony. It was the cultural hegemony. That's the dominant cultural power. It means the elites had basically blocked Marxist revolution in the West. So his view was a little bit different. He took the Marx football and ran with it. So he views the world, his vision of reality is power dynamics. You're going to hear that here and there as we go through the evening. And it's basically cultural power, the dominant cultural power versus the submissive or the oppressed cultural power. Economics and matter. Again, it's this very materialistic vision of reality. There is no metaphysical, there's no spiritual, and ultimately, again, no moral. You can't get there with that type of equipment. So the problem was the hegemony. The elites control and oppress the lower classes ideologically through the institutions, the academy, education, and the universities, the church, politics, the media, etc. So his idea was really, it was a worldview issue, that the Marxist revolution did not occur because of worldview. So here we go. He basically applied Marxism to the culture. And so the action that cultural Marxism takes in Gramsci's vision is to create a counter hegemony to overthrow the dominant and oppressive power structure. Okay, so we have another type of revolution here, right? We're talking about an overthrow of a dominant, oppressive power structure. The goal, okay, so this is important, raise consciousness. Keep that in mind. Hold that in your head. And then subvert Western culture from the inside. Set up the Western culture for a Marxist revolution. So his was like pre-revolution revolution, if that makes any sense. So Gramsci's important to remember. We'll be circling back to him later, but remember raised consciousness. Here's another gentleman. This is Max Horkheimer. He's the one that came up with the word critical theory. And he was an interesting character, but he basically, gave critical theory a purpose. He defined it, gave it a purpose, and he basically said that it's an emancipatory form of Marxian theory. It's radical and it emancipates. So now we've put another layer on Marxism and cultural Marxism. Now you have this critical theory thing with this emancipatory sort of layer to it. And what's it for? What's the purpose? To liberate human beings from the circumstances that enslave them. Okay, that's sort of an interesting turn here. And so Max Horkheimer said this: the revolution won't happen with guns. He's talking about the Marxist revolution. And really he's really pointing to the cultural revolution. He said the revolution won't happen with guns. Rather, it will happen incrementally, year by year, generation by generation. We will gradually infiltrate their education institutions and their political offices, transforming them slowly into Marxist entities as we move towards universal egalitarianism. Whoa. This guy's taking it to a whole new level here. Right. And so, again, revolution, now it's incremental and now it's generation by generation. So these guys are slowing this thing down and they're gradually going to infiltrate our institutions. These are the mediating institutions of culture, education. Earlier meant that you heard the church, political offices, media. So now you're getting an idea of where this critical theory is headed. And mind you, it's not a theory. It's a worldview. Don't get it confused with critical thinking. This is critical theory. And so it is a bona fide worldview. And so this is Rudy Duce. I don't know how to spell it, say his name properly. Somebody could probably, but Rudy here basically puts critical theory in action. And he calls it the long march through the institutions. And then he defines the space. This is the battleground. These are the institutions that critical theorists are going to march through, slowly changing them, incrementally, year by year, generation by generation. The church, education, media, entertainment, government, and the family. Now, look at these for a moment and notice how successful this worldview has been. It's been extremely successful. You must credit these folks. They are very driven and very focused about what they're doing. You have to at least give them credit. You may not agree with them, but these people know what they're about, and they've done it for generations. This seeds of this were planted 100 years ago in the United States, and now we're seeing the fruit of that particular seed in our culture. Critical theory defined. It's a method used in a variety of cultural studies that is not interested simply in understanding the how and why of a current reality, but instead it seeks to impose a moral vision of society. Okay, back to worldview. Critical theory is a worldview. It has a moral vision, but going back to Marx and Gramsci, everything is matter and power dynamics and economics. Where did the moral vision come from? This is something different. There is a moral vision, though, here. The goal of critical theory is to identify systemic problems through critique in society and dismantle them. They presuppose these problems arise from power structures that oppress people. So here we are with power dynamics again. You'll see that word. That is the us versus them, the elites versus the poor, the owners versus the workers, oppressors versus oppressed. You're going to see that throughout. That's what it creates. And so that's what critical theory is all about, power dynamics. So here's some of the claims of critical theory. There's other claims, but I'm just going to hit the highlights. Everyone is divided into two groups, those who have power and those who don't, power dynamics. Those in power obtain power at the expense of others. So that's a zero-sum game. So the zero-sum game is basically, think about a pizza or a pie that has so many pieces, and I get a slice, you get a slice, another friend gets a slice, and that's it. That's the end of the pie. And in order for me to have a bigger slice, I've got to take it from someone else. That means I may take your slice of pie because I want more. That's the zero-sum game. It doesn't take into consideration that we could go buy a new pie, or we could make a pie, or even open up a pie store. Because in the worldview of critical theory, everything is limited. It's a zero-sum game, winners and losers. And in order to have something, you must take it from someone else. Or in order for someone to have more money or more resources, they have to take it from someone else. And so that creates the oppression. And rather than me going out and creating my own business or whatever, I have to basically take it from someone else. So the third point, those who have power always oppress those who don't. So regardless of where you are in the power structure, you could be the kindest, most humble, righteous person. And if you have any power, you're oppressing those who don't. Okay, so these are some interesting claims, and they're claiming they're true. So they're making truth claims. So now we get into some identity things. A person's group identity determines which category they belong to. They're either an oppressor or they're oppressed. And so you're put into a group. It divides the entire world in all the people, all the individuals, and puts them in groups. A person's group identity is determined by gender, race, gender identity, sexual orientation, religion, economic status, etc. When a person's group identity overlaps, this is referred to as intersectionality. So you've probably heard the word intersectionality. That's basically it. It's these group identities and how they overlap. And ultimately, the more overlap that you have, the more moral authority that you have in the culture. So the more victim status, the more oppressed groups that you can identify with, you have moral authority, versus someone who can't claim any of these intersectional groups or oppressed groups. They have power, but they don't have any moral authority. So you see how it divides and conquers culture and ultimately relationships in some very devastating ways. So critical theory is a worldview that attempts to form and shape reality to fit its desired vision of the world. It basically shapes reality toward a result. On the other hand, the Christian worldview, just for a moment, is the exact opposite. We don't shape reality. Reality is reality. And we shape our worldview around the reality that God created, right? So this is the antithesis of that. So you can see where these come into contention, is that you have one worldview that's trying to shape reality to its result, that its desired vision of reality, and the other one is, the Christian worldview is like, we need to shape our minds and understand reality as it is, as God created it. So critical race theory, CRT, is critical theory applied to race. And so now we're moving into critical race theory. So it does take some offshoots, but we're going to try to keep it centered here as best we can for the moment. So we're talking about critical race theory now. And so Zeus Leonardo, who's a critical race scholar, said this: for the white hegemony to saturate everyday life, it has to be secured by the process of domination, or those acts, decisions, and policies that the white subjects perpetrate on people of color. So here you go. Now you're seeing this within the power dynamic, the oppressed and oppressed being applied to race or ethnicity. And so here we go. This is where it's sort of the heat of this comes in, because now you're talking about interpersonal relationships between brothers and sisters in Christ, family members. This is where the division starts to happen, and where we start to run into problems in the culture, and particularly in the church. So critical race theory gets applied systematically across culture. So when you hear words like systemic racism or institutional racism, things like that, you're seeing that the critical race theory is getting applied systematically across culture. It's critiquing, and it's trying to transform the culture. So here's some definitions that I think that are helpful. CRT argues as a starting point that the axis of American social life is fundamentally constructed in race. Wait a second, Christian asks, is that true? That's a claim. So if we're going to go further, let's just do a little cultural worldview analysis here. As a starting point, critical race theory says the axis of American social life is fundamentally constructed in race. Is that true? Okay. As a result, so now there's the assumption. Now, as the result, the economic, political, and historical relationships and arguments that social actors have to institutions and social processes are all race-based. So the assumption is all social life hinges around race. Okay. And then so everything else flows and is connected from that, emerges from that, and flows from that. Okay. Is that true? Okay, that's something to think about. These are some claims. So Richard Delgado, another author another scholar, says, unlike traditional civil rights discourse, which stresses incrementalism and step-by-step progress, critical race theory questions the very foundations of the liberal order. That's basically Western culture, Western government, including equality theory, legal reasoning, Enlightenment rationalism, and neutral principles of constitutional law. Okay, so now we're getting into politics. And remember that if you were on my last Zoominar, I told you that politics is downstream from culture, and that it's the last bastion of power in the culture, because politics at its root, its very nature, is power, for good or for ill. So here you're seeing it now, critical race theory being applied pretty heavily on the legal side of things, law, politics. So that's just a quick run by of critical theory, critical race theory, how it emerged. I hope the history is helpful in understanding it, and also hope that sharing a bit how ideas shape reality makes sense in the context of how we got to where we are today. And then, because I think if we understand those things, we can better think about them. We can better reason about them. We can apprehend these ideas and ask some questions. We should always be asking questions. So here's our next question. How is it impacting the church? How's critical theory impacting the church? So Tom Price said that evangelical Christianity has become cultural Christianity and follows the culture. We've become the follower, not the leader. Now, that makes me bristle a little bit, but if I'm really honest, and I look at the church, particularly in America, to the big C church. I'm not pointing out individual churches. Look at the big C church, the evangelical church. We really have become the follower. We have to admit that this is actually true about us in a general sense. Not every Christian and not every church. That's not what this is saying. This is a broad generalization of cultural Christianity. And we're seeing cultural Christianity being challenged right now in every aspect of the culture. And I'm afraid that this is true, that we're the follower, not the leader. And we need to think about this and see how we can change this, how we can be the leader again. So how's it impacting the church? Let's do a little bit of history. 18th century, 19th century, we saw the gospel bifurcated. And so you had this split between, I'm just going to be very broad here, between evangelism and social action, right? So the gospel was split, and evangelism focused on doctrine, privatization of faith, meaning it's my personal faith, emotionalism, fundamentalism, and sometimes we can ignore social action, right? On the other side, where the bifurcation, you have a focus on social action, a focus on social contextualization. And that means that you're contextualizing everything around a biblical, or trying to contextualize everything around a biblical narrative. And some of those things below you'll see, I'll explain it in a minute. But it's focused on social issues. And you get into liberalism. And then on the social action side, they can ignore doctrine, right? So you have this bifurcation. And let me say that before the gospel was bifurcated, these things were hand in hand. There was a distinct, fuller vision of what the gospel was. You were evangelism, and you were serving, you were taking action, and you were sharing the gospel. At the same time, they were married, and now they've become divorced. And we've seen all this before. We've seen the critical theory type of stuff and the social contextualization and liberalism before in the church. And so the social gospel, liberal theology, liberation theology, Black liberation theology, feminist liberation theology, progressive Christianity. There's now a modernist Christianity, which is basically a nihilistic or atheist, practical atheism is what it is in the current culture. But I didn't add that to that list because we haven't really seen that before. And so this is important to understand where the on-ramps for critical theory come into the church. So we're importing foreign ideas and worldly philosophies that are antithetical to the Bible. And the question is, why is it so attractive? Why are these ideas so attractive, particularly to Christians? And we're going to get into that, but we have to ask the question, why is it so attractive? Well, critical race theory borrows capital from Christian tradition, co-opts biblical language and the Christian ethic. It untethers them from the biblical foundation and redefines them in order to apply them within the worldview. So they're plundering the Christian tradition and language and the Christian ethic, because there is no atheistic ethic at the end of the day taken to its logical conclusion. Marxism doesn't really have an ethic. It's all about power and oppressors and oppressed. There is no ethic there. So what they have to do is borrow from the Christian tradition in order to have some type of ethical framework. They're also borrowing and co-opting biblical language. That's this attractive thing. Why it's so attractive is the language, I believe. And so we'll get into that in a minute. So this is one reason why good-hearted Christians fall for a repackaged form of liberation theology. And stop here for a minute. It's important to understand that all of us are open to deception. We're all open to be in the wrong. We're all obviously all open to sin. And yet we have to understand that the way that this stuff has been packaged, it's very attractive. It has an allure to it. But it's just repackaged form of liberation theology mixed with a few other things. It's just repackaged, new language, a little bit more of an ethic to it. So discussion and debate are difficult because we're using the same words, but different dictionaries. When truth is relative and power is everything, redefining words is in the realm of options to attain power. For the Christian, we can't do that. We can't just start, redefining words around us, because truth is objective and power isn't everything. Power belongs to God, right? And so this relativity that's in the critical theory ethic means your truth is your truth, my truth is my truth. There is no objective truth, except that statement that there is no objective truth is an objective truth statement. Let that bake your noodle for a minute. So they're redefining words. And so that's in the realm of options, because there is no ethic to say, no, that's wrong. So when we redefine words, what are we doing? We're redefining reality. We're reshaping reality. And that's something that we need to pay attention to. Oh, went too far. Okay. So as we know, we're learning, we redefine words, we're redefining reality. Here's some words. On the left-hand side, you see ethnicity, ethnos, justice, reconciliation, truth, oppression, privilege, identity, love, equity, peace. Those are just a few words that I pulled from Scripture. Those words can be found in Scripture. Interesting word is ethnicity, ethnos. That's the Greek. Ethnicity, ethnos. That goes back to the word nations. You will not find the concept of race in the Bible besides one type of race, and that's the human race. We are nations, tongues, tribes, and peoples. Ethnos, nations. So now we have these additional words that the world has introduced into the framework. And so critical race theory has a whole other slew of words and concepts. Let's remember that all of these, and in some way, are borrowing capital from traditional Christianity. They're co-opting language. They're taking from the Christian ethic and applying it in the way that they want, divorced from the truth of God's word. So they're untethering it from the true definitions of words. So you have race. You hear these out in the culture. Race, social justice, racial reconciliation, my truth, systematic racism, white privilege, identity politics, white fragility. We'll come back to that one. Hate speech, anti-racism, racial justice, white ignorance, power dynamics, equality, climate justice, health equity. So Robin DiAngelo right here, white fragility, you see a little arrow going over there. She wrote a book. I did a critical response and worldview analysis several months ago on it. You can get it on my blog. I can send it to you as well. She wrote a book. It's basically identity politics, back to intersectionality and critical race theory. You're in all these different groups, and those you identify with give you power. So white fragility is a state in which even a minimum amount of racial stress becomes intolerable, triggering a range of defensive moves. These moves include outward display of emotions such as anger, fear, guilt, and behaviors such as argumentation, silence, and leaving stress-inducing situations. These behaviors, in turn, function to reinstate racial equilibrium. So if you're in my last Zoominar, we talked about silence versus speaking the truth. This is the thing, right? This is one of the rubs right here. If you say something, you're guilty. If you don't say something, you're guilty, right? And so you can read her book if you want. I've written a critique of it. It's a confusing book from anthropology, sociology side of things, but I think it gives you an idea of what you're dealing with if you want to grab it. It's not highly recommended, but you need to know how people are thinking in order to be able to confront these ideas. Okay. Back to Gramsci. Remember I said raise consciousness. That was important. Subvert Western culture from the inside, back to the long march through the institution. So we're now moving into this realm. What is the modern expression of having one's consciousness raised? Again, this is one of those things, we've seen this before. When was the last time in American history everybody wanted to raise their consciousness? The 1960s, right? Tune in, turn on, drop out. Timothy Leary, he was talking about a cultural change, a raising of awareness. Now, given he was talking about really within the realm of anti-war, civil rights, and drugs, particularly marijuana and LSD. And so that's Timothy Leary. Tune in, turn on, drop out. In the 2020s, I get a little cute here, but it's tune in, turn on, get woke, right? And I don't mean that in a derogatory term, but that's what's going on. You get this talk about being woke everywhere now. So to be woke is to raise one's consciousness to the oppressor versus oppressed struggle, the power dynamics through society and culture. To be woke and to stay woke is to be with it, or in the know, or on the right side of history in regard to certain cultural and social issues, particularly related to ethnicity and sexual identity. And in other words, being woke is to reside on the moral high ground on a popular social issue. Okay, so when I said that this is made the point a few slides ago, why this is so alluring, why it's so attractive, it plays to people's pride. Right here, if I can raise my conscious, I know something that other people don't know. I'm aware, and wow, I've got this moral high ground on this social issue. I know what's going on, and by the way, I know how to fix it. Right, so it plays to that, and that's insidious, in my opinion. How is it impacting the church? Okay, how is critical theory impacting the church? I've talked to church leaders, I've talked to pastors, I've talked to friends. I've had so many conversations. And so this list is what I've come up with. This isn't exhaustive, but it's a list. What is this idea, this worldview that's coming into the church? What is it doing to us? It's undermining biblical authority. It's distorting the gospel. It's destroying trust. It's ending friendships. I'm seeing friendships, multiple years of friendship being just burn up in a split second over a comment or a perception or something like that over this stuff. It's causing divisions in the church, and that is dangerous and deadly to a local body. It's causing cultural, moral confusion. It's wrecking our witness. When other people, non-believing people, see us treating each other badly, and sheep fighting with sheep, and shepherds attacking their sheep and abusing their sheep over the issue of racism and white supremacy and all this stuff, it wrecks our witness for Christ. And then we're imposing legalism. It imposes legalism. It's just nonsense. And then it also sets up the environment for gossip and slander. And I go back to James here, chapter 4, and this is a paraphrase. I will not slander other believers. There is only one lawgiver and judge, the one who is able to save and to destroy. Who am I to judge my neighbor? So we've got to be extremely careful in how we interact with each other, how we love each other, how we disagree. As Christians, as brothers and sisters, we have to be extremely careful how we go about disagreeing with each other, particularly on hot button issues like this. Because guess what? The world is watching and God is watching. And so we need to pause and take an assessment of what we're doing, what we're saying, what we're thinking, and how is my walk with God? Ask that question first. How is my walk with God? Okay. Let's deal with these issues to bring back peace, to bring back shalom, and preserve the bond of peace within the church. So that we're going to land the plane now. How should Christians think about CRT? We're going to get in that next week because it's been almost right at an hour. And so I'm going to just hold off on that. And so we're going to go through a couple of ways for you to frame this up so you can understand it. But then, okay, how are you supposed to think about it? And then we're going to move into, okay, what can I do? What can I do as a homeschool mom or an attorney or a pastor or just in my friend group, in my community group, my small group? What can I do that brings the grace of God, the truth, a full understanding of this worldview, and then apply biblical truth to it with humility and love, and go forward from there. So leading up to the next time we get together, I believe we have a better vision. I don't think critical race theory offers anything, period. I think it's interesting. I think that it's an acid on the culture. It is now dominant. Critical theory is dominant in the West now. So we have to recognize that. But I believe we have a better vision, an integrated kingdom vision. In Christ our King, we have the vision, we have the resources, and we shall undertake the great recovery. And so that'll be the goal next time. Okay, so I've got a question here, and if you want to ask questions, feel free. I apologize, I already answered this question. I wasn't there, but will you email us the presentation after this evening? Yes, I will be. I can email it to you. I'm going to put it up on the site, and better yet, we're recording, so I'll go through and edit the recording as well, and make sure that I upload it to the site. I'll put it on YouTube and link to it as well. But feel free to email me as well if you have any questions about all this. And I just appreciate your time. We ended almost on time. We started a couple minutes late, and now we're finishing. Now we're finishing a couple minutes late. But again, I appreciate the time that you've spent with me this evening. I hope this brings some clarity. I'm sure it's creating more questions than answers, and that's okay. We need to be thinking deeply about this. We need to think about in this, as you prepare for the week, and the next webinar think about what is good, true, and beautiful about how we're created, the Imago Dei. Ask the questions that my friend John Stone Street asks is, when you look at the culture around you, what is good that you can celebrate and promote and protect? What is missing that you can contribute or create? What is evil that we must fight and stop? And then what is broken that we can restore? And so when we look at the culture, we look at all these problems and our brothers and sisters that we may disagree with, remember, we're image bearers. We're immortals interacting with immortals in a broken world. And we do have opportunities to see the good, the true, and the beautiful in a very broken world. And so next week, we'll be covering a couple of other things. And I just thank you for your time. Again, email me if you have any questions, and I will see you soon. Bye now.